If you've run your service business for any amount of time, I'm absolutely sure that you'll have had a sales meeting that went incredibly well, but then everything evaporated from the point that you promised the sales quotation or struggled to follow up in the most appropriate way. In this video, we're going to focus on 3 things that can happen after you've sent the quote and how to send that quote itself. Getting your prospect to a point where they're ready and eager to receive a quote from you shows that they've got a lot of trust in your ability to be able to solve their problem. And it's kind of the equivalent of hiring a mountain guide to help them scale a mountain. And if you don't get that quote to them quickly, it's the same equivalent of leaving them at the top of their Everest. They're gazing out into the horizon beyond. They've had a really good conversation with you. You've reassured them that you're the right person to help them. But if you don't get that quote to them, it's exactly the same equivalent of leaving them on top of that mountain. Where do they go next? They feel vulnerable, they feel exposed, and they don't feel that it's still in the right hands of the guide that they've trusted to get them to that point. So it's incredibly important that you get that quote to them as soon as you can after the meeting. If it takes you days or even weeks to get that quote to them, that exposure that they feel, that vulnerability that they feel, will always linger. Even if they accept that quote from you, there'll always be that feeling at the back of their mind that they're exposed, that they're vulnerable, that you're not quite the guide that they thought you were in that meeting. And that puts you in a difficult position. So it's incredibly important that if you've had a fantastic sales meeting with somebody and you've agreed that you're the person to be able to help them solve the problems that they're facing, right now, it's incredibly important that you get that quote to them as quickly as possible. And I would recommend that you get it to them on that same day, even if it means working a little bit later or getting that over to them a little bit later in the day. It's incredibly important that you get it to them so that you keep that level of reassurance there. If this sounds a little bit crazy, then either you're overcomplicating the service that you deliver to new clients and putting yourself at risk of not maintaining that great relationship that you started at that sales meeting, or you're undervaluing the importance of great follow-up and great attentiveness in terms of running a profitable business. Nothing adds to the profitability of your business more than winning new valuable business. The format that quote takes is entirely up to you and what you feel comfortable with. It could either be a document with images in there and a summary of those services. It could be a detailed spreadsheet if it's a more kind of detailed offering that you have, or if there's kind of a more creative nuance to it, sending it in a PowerPoint format also works as well. But bear in mind, it needs to be producible quickly and efficiently and professionally. And one tip that I would give beyond sort of the flexibility of what you use is send it in a PDF format. PDF stands for portable document format. So that means that it'll open on desktops, laptops, or even mobile devices. So send it as a PDF format. Now, when you send the quote, one of 3 things will happen. The ideal scenario is that they read the quote immediately, they like what's in there, and they sign up and either agree to that quote or pay the first installment. That's our ideal scenario. The second scenario is that they come back with some immediate questions, and I'll come on to how you deal with that in a second. The third scenario is that it seems like it's just being ignored and there isn't any response whatsoever, and we'll touch on that as well. So in that first scenario, that they accept the quote and perhaps pay that first installment, what's really important is that you move them into your new client onboarding process ever so quickly. Don't leave them hanging, don't leave them at the top of the mountain there feeling exposed and vulnerable. They've made that commitment to work with you. Let's go and take action. Now, the second scenario, if they come back to you with questions, a question or questions, what's really important is that you respond to those questions quickly and effectively. Now, typically, prospects will reply to a quote sent to them via email with an email. Now, what's ever so important here is that you don't descend into email back and forth. You've built a great rapport with them at that sales meeting and in the follow-up of that quote. Both of those scenarios positioned you on a really professional level with them. If you just respond by email, then you are in their email inbox with 200 other emails that they might get over the course of that week. There's no differentiation between your emails and whatever else they're facing that day. Let's bring them back up to that great relationship that you created with them at that sales meeting or in the professional quote follow-up. And in order to do that, instead of replying via email, what I'd encourage you to do is install either the Loom or the Vimeo Chrome extensions for your browser. And what they do is allow you to capture a recording of yourself and the screen, and it gets recorded to the cloud. So there's no video editing required or anything like that. It just gets stored, it gets recorded. And the reason that you're doing that is that you're then showing A, some personality, and B, some continuity with the experience that they've already had with you at that sales meeting, and you're recording a reply to their question. If it's relevant that you have the quote that you prepared for them open at the same time so you can talk through it, then that's great because it gives you a link between the quote and how you're presenting your answer. Now that's going to go back to them via email, but it's going to look very different when they open that email to other emails that they're receiving that day. Your alternative, and you might do this before you hit the record button on Loom, is to just pick up the phone and have a conversation with them that continues that sales conversation that you've already had. So two different ways of responding to that email question that they've had, neither of which involving an email response to them with just some text. So what happens if you don't hear anything back? Well, I don't think you should panic if you haven't heard anything back immediately to your quote. Some people, when they've come out of a sales meeting, want to just think things through, want to let the thoughts that you've had the discussion about just digest and to think about them. I would give it 36 hours before you follow up with anybody. And then it's important that after those 36 hours have passed and that first follow-up, that it's done in a positive way. It's not done in a nagging way. Don't, whatever you do, send an email to say, I haven't heard back, is everything okay? That then makes them feel uncomfortable. What I'd like you to do is that same method that we did when we were answering a question. I want you to open up your browser, open up the quote, hit record on Loom or on Vimeo or whatever your screen record facility is. And because we don't have a question to answer, what I'd like you to do is to commentate through the quote, to give your explanation as to why, based on the questions that you're answering in that sales meeting, why you structured the quote in a certain way. That then gives you a different perspective, or gives them a different perspective of how you're answering the questions that they had at that sales appointment. It positions you in a way that shows you're attentive and that you're following up, and you're just giving them some further guidance on that quotation. So whether they've opened it and read it or not, you're giving a slightly different slant on what that quote's all about and how you're thinking about them. And the difference between doing that and doing kind of a nagging follow-up to say, I haven't heard from you, or is anything that I can do, instead of positioning you as a nagger or somebody that's desperate for the sale, what that's doing is helping you to show that you're an attentive service provider to work with, and that will pay dividends. So what you've then got at the end of 36 hours since you met with them, you have had a great sales meeting with them. You've promised to deliver a quote to them, which you've followed up on. You've done it, so you've ticked that box. So that's two great experiences that they've had. And then 36 hours later, you've also shown that you're an attentive and caring service provider by following up, not in a nagging way, but in a helpful way that shows them that you are a trusted pair of hands that they should be working with. In a different video, I'm going to cover what happens if then nothing happens after that 36 to 48 hour period, How do we then move them into a short-term nurture and a long-term nurture? But I hope that this has given you some good food for thought on things that you should be doing after you've had that sales meeting and sent that first quote. If you valued the tips and advice in this video, then please consider subscribing to the Lemonade Plan YouTube channel, where I'll be sharing hints and tips and advice on how you can run your service business more effectively, more profitably, and giving you more time for other activities.